We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is only the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome. Good morning, everyone. You're tuned in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, and you're listening to Evidence of Design. I'm your host, Jason Taylor, and will be joined in studio by my co-host, Mary Lawrence, in just a second. Our normal co-host as well, Matt Treadwell, is still not with us as he's dealing with a family loss. He is in our thoughts. Today's show is first airing on Saturday, July 18th, 2020. That means that we are live in studios at the WXIR studios. This is episode 103 of Evidence of Design. For those who are new to Evidence of Design, our show is all about discussing income and wealth inequality in the United States. We critique the high amount of economic inequality that we're living through. We are living through times of historically high economic inequality ever since modern records began. Our economic inequality that we are experiencing today is at such a rate that it mirrors that which preceded the Great Depression in the 1920s and 30s. The wealthiest individuals in our society control the vast majority of our income and wealth, and that means they also, unfortunately because of our policies, control so much of our political power, which then they use to shape our system, our way of life, our policies to then generate even more wealth and economic advantage and so on and so forth. Not everyone does this. Our goal is not to say that if someone happens to be wealthy, they are a bad person or whatnot, but we do critique the system that allows so much wealth to be concentrated in so many few hands, and also we critique the system that allows wealth to then transfer into political power, because it has so many negative ramifications on all aspects of our society, as we discuss throughout our show. Mary, you are joined us in the studio. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Thanks for sitting here right next to me.
It's my pleasure, since I sit next to you pretty often.
Yeah, you're also the engineer and co-host for the show, and we're both wearing masks in studio. Last week I was saying that I have trouble breathing, I discovered, when I'm trying to talk and wear the mask. I didn't practice. I was going to practice throughout the week, do some harmonics and chord progressions with my voice.
Maybe you just have to talk a little slower.
Yeah.
It might be you're trying to take in too much air at once.
But, so we do air on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. here at 100.9 FM WXIR. Kind of jokes aside, what are we doing on today's episode? Well, as always, we'll start with the numbers with COVID-19. The numbers are not optimistic, but they're important to know so that we're all on the same page when it comes to living through our pandemic. So we'll quickly cover the numbers as we do every week, and then for the main part of our shows, we'll be discussing recent calls and recent growing movements in New York State. Recently, there was a letter signed by over 100 New York State legislators. That means those folks in our state assembly and state senate who are calling for more taxes on the wealthy, specifically a billionaires tax. There are other proposals for a millionaires tax. These would be new tax increases on the wealthy to close the state's budget shortfall. We currently have around a $14 billion budget shortfall, and then the revenue would be used for social services, such as for hospitals, education, infrastructure, and unemployment protections, so on and so forth. So we'll be talking about who's behind the calls for increasing taxes on the wealthy, how that would work, and what Governor Cuomo's stance is on it, and also what the stance is of other folks in the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans. So it's a very interesting calls. The state legislature is re-meeting, I think, next Monday, and there's a couple of sort of wealth tax proposals on the table that they might take up But again, our governor, Democratic, is not solely or wholly behind it. So it's quite interesting. And we'll be talking about that for the most part on today's show. Towards the end of the hour, we'll also get to some things in the news regarding voter disenfranchisement. There's been a number of reports, of course, that we've already covered on the show of polling places during this past primary season being restricted, especially targeted for poor black or brown communities, such that there is like one polling place among hundreds of thousands of voters. Thankfully, I don't think this happened in New York State all that much, particularly in Monroe County. I don't think so. But there, some of our polling places were closed. But we
saw some different issues locally, but different
right.
issues.
Yeah, in particular, these are calls coming from like the South, Kentucky, Alabama, and so on and so forth. So we'll be covering also how a lot of absentee ballots, around 1% of all absentee ballots filed in the recent primary election, were not counted. They were thrown out for a number of different reasons, such as not making it in at the correct time. Even though I believe in New York State, as long as you're postmarked at the correct day, it doesn't matter when it comes in, as long as you're postmarked the correct day, you should be fine. I'm not sure.
I do believe there's still a limitation on when it comes in. I don't know specifically what the timeline is, but I believe it has to be postmarked by the day of the election, and then it still has to be received within a certain amount of time, because if they call the election and it comes in after that, they obviously can't count it and change the election. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe it's around 7 or 10 days after the election, and it does have to come in within that time.
Okay.
But that's still a pretty decent amount of time if you get it in. Hopefully the USPS is getting it in on time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 3 things we'll cover today. Let's start with the COVID numbers right now. Then we'll get to recent calls in New York State by some of our legislators to increase taxes on the wealthy. And then towards the end of the hour, we will talk about voter disenfranchisement. And so right now, let's get to the numbers, Mary. COVID-19 in the United States, it's pretty dire. Cases are rising in the vast majority of states right now, and I believe you shared with me this morning that there's been around 11 times just this month so far in July that we have topped our daily record for the number of new daily COVID-19 cases.
Yeah, I mean, we're being number one in the world on this, We're breaking records almost every day in July. But yes, this is not good news in this case. For July, as of Thursday the 16th, we had broken the record for highest number of cases 11 times. Again, right. 16 days, 11 times. So on Thursday the 16th, there were more than 75,600 new cases in the United States. Not just cases, but new cases. And again, that means that was the most in July per day. And we had broken the record 10 times before that.
So we're now at around 75,000 new cases a day. I'm pretty sure that is more cases than Wuhan, China ever had. So the place where the coronavirus originated, we're now topping that out every single day. So it's
that is a national number, so it's not concentrated within one location. I don't know specifically city by city what the numbers are. Even still, that's a very high number, and especially this late in the pandemic, when most other countries are on a downturn, the majority of countries in Western Europe are seeing like no more than 20 cases a day. We even saw all of China had something
15,
under 20 as well.
Yeah, 15 cases a day maybe.
At least that are reported, but even still, that's a very low number in comparison to 75,000.
Yeah, there's a number of maps and charts you can pull up online. The New York Times is one of them. If you look at the New York Times' coronavirus hotspot map, you can do that for just the United States and look at each individual state, or you can do that as a world, and they kind of color code the different countries in the world, all the 200 of them, where red is really bad, cases are rising at a certain percentage, and then it kind of goes down to sort of orange, and then very light yellow, and then pale. So the looking at that map today, the countries around the world that have the red colored to them because the cases are rising precipitously are the United States. Let's do this. Brazil. Oman. South Africa.
I believe Argentina might be on there
It might be. I'm not.
I know there is a country to the far west in South America, and I can't remember if it's Chile or Argentina that I saw, but one of them is also red.
Mm-hmm. So we often hear of American exceptionalism in a positive way, where America is the kind of best country for many different reasons. We're also exceptional, Mary, with the number of our COVID-19 cases, and I don't think this is random or haphazard. We've covered on the show a lot, of course, how our federal government, led by the Trump administration, has utterly failed us when it comes to protecting us from this pandemic, for allowing us to be prepared to fight this pandemic. And unfortunately, with our very polarized culture nowadays, there are still many Americans who view the pandemic in a political way and not a mental health way, and that is a very serious national security threat and a democratic threat that we are struggling in every avenue of our society with our severe political polarization.
Yeah, and that outlook was certainly supported by the Trump administration. I know Trump only recently, I think in the last 2 weeks, started wearing a mask in public for the first time. Mm-hmm. And we've been in lockdown since March. Mm-hmm. And obviously states are starting to come out of lockdown in a very haphazard way. States are confused about regulations and how they should regulate mask wearing. And the administration really has not done not even close to a good job supporting states and guiding states on what kind of legislation they should be passing surrounding mask wearing or responses to the pandemic at all.
Yeah, this has been an utter national disaster, I think.
And still is.
It still is. Yeah, it's hard to say that this is going to get better in the near future. I don't want to be pessimistic about this, but just listening to the medical professionals, this isn't magically going away as much as folks like Trump will say it is. More Americans have died in the past 3 to 4 months than the entire 20-year wars that we've been fighting in. And it's really appalling, and it's really sad. I think what's most sad about it, besides the terrible and tragic loss of life, not that I don't want to give that attention or the sort of emotional resonance that it deserves, but I think what's most sad is the way that this has been politically polarizing, and that it's very I'm exhausted at how almost every single aspect of our life seems to be one camp versus the other, black versus white, good versus evil, things of that nature. And it's just sort of exhausting to constantly seem to be waging these moral battles.
Well, it's waging moral battles around things that shouldn't need a moral battle. Mm-hmm. Like asking someone to wear a mask in order to protect others that's a community issue. That's not a moral issue. I think that we're very out of touch with where our ethics need to be questioned and where they should be more of a given. Yeah, and, I guess to cite some politics here, I don't mean to take back what I just said about everything being black versus white, but, I mean, we have to be honest about where a lot of this also comes. I mean, not honest, but we have to really look at who our leaders are and what they're saying, because that matters, because then people end up following what leaders do. But for instance, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, this week said that localities in Georgia weren't allowed to mandate residents to wear masks, so he rescinded orders from various mayors in the largest of Georgia's cities who said that all residents must wear masks, and he said that it's not up to them, and thou shall not be mandated to wear masks. And at the same time, our medical professionals in the country are saying, please wear a mask, please wear a mask, please wear a mask. It's incredibly effective. To be on a little bit of the other end, apparently he did still recommend that residents wear masks. But it's an interesting sort of situation where a legislator is very hesitant to mandate something while still supporting the actual movement or the actual action. And I think that's a question of where government should intervene in this person's mind. Like, yes, you should wear a mask, but as a governor, I can't mandate you to wear one. That's a different interesting question, but an interesting one all the same.
Yeah, that's fair. I can kind of get that point, in terms of who actually has the power. But the larger point is just we know that mask wearing is effective and it shouldn't be a political issue. I kind of view it as wearing a seatbelt. I mean, the government mandates us to wear a seatbelt because it keeps us safe. And I think that kind of wearing a mask is very similar, such that it keeps everyone else safe. So perhaps we need not say more about this right now, Mary, besides the fact that our COVID numbers are still horrendous. I think that our current administration has done a very, very, very poor job, perhaps historically poor job of looking out and protecting us. That's the role of government. And unfortunately, it seems like this will continue. I guess actually one last note on this discussion is that I was looking at kind of various maps and charts about who's actually wearing masks, what percentage of the population in various counties around the country are wearing masks, and Monroe County seems to be doing pretty well. So our numbers, of course, have been fairly flat for the entirety of the pandemic so far. It's really interesting, actually, that we've kind of just for the most part, have pretty flat daily cases and hospitalization rates and whatnot. But we seem to be pretty doing with our mask wearing here, too.
I know that I'll be continuing to wear a mask, at least for the near future, probably longer than the near future, but I'll be wearing mine.
Yeah, me too. I kind of like it. I don't have to shave. I mean, I wasn't shaving much anyways, but now it doesn't matter what I look like underneath the mask.
Yeah, I don't have to shave either.
I kind of like the look. It's kind of fun to see everyone's eyes. It's different. But yeah, let's turn attention from that. Normally we do a quick music break, but I think we're having some system difficulties here, technical difficulties. So we will just do a soft transition to our next and main topic of discussion.
No tunes.
No tunes. And that is talking...
Does that mean I have to sing?
You're welcome to give it a shot if you'd like.
I'm just kidding. I don't really feel like it.
We were listening to some great music this morning. We don't have to share what that is. But just kidding. Has anyone heard of Slipknot? Definitely gets the blood pumping in the morning. Yeah, so folks, you're tuned into 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. You're listening to Evidence of Design. As we opened most of our shows recently, we just covered some of the most recent COVID-19 figures in the country. And now we are going to turn our attention to the main part of the show, and that is covering recent calls by over 100 New York State legislators to enact a billionaires tax, and even there are proposals to enact a millionaires tax as well. And so let's talk about some of that, but let me remind you that if our phone system is working, you're welcome to give us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, we're live here on Saturday, July 18th, 2020. So you're welcome to give us a call at 585-219-8889. If you can't reach us via phone, you're welcome to email us at radioeod@gmail.com. Again, radioeod@gmail.com. Our EOD, of course, stands for Evidence of Design. You can also reach us on Facebook and Twitter at Radio EOD. Mary, let's talk about this recent proposal by several legislators in our state to enact a billionaires tax, I should say. So last month, over 100 New York State legislators wrote and signed a short sort of policy document saying that, look, we need to look out for our poor folks and our working folks, particularly during COVID-19. And we need to enact more revenue generation for the state.
That sounds like a great plan.
Well, I'm certainly in support of it, and what they use to argue their position is that in New York State, we're currently in a $14 billion budget shortfall. So we've covered this on the show before, that when does it feel like our governments are never not in a budget shortfall? The federal government, state governments, local governments. It seems like every single time issues of budgeting comes up, we're always talking about we don't have enough money, even though we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And we argue on Evidence of Design that this sort of widespread nature of governments saying they're in revenue shortfalls is because it's a decades-long project by conservative economic forces in our country to slash taxes at all means possible. For those who remember Government 101, government raises money through taxation. And so if the government is short on money, it means they don't have enough revenue. Of course, conservative of course, folks who endorse conservative economic positions say that the reason why governments don't have money is because they're spending too much or they're wasteful. I have never really believed in that argument, and I know that there are examples. I'm not saying it's not true that governments can be wasteful or that governments could spend too much money on things that they might not need to, but I certainly don't think that the reason why so many of our federal, state, and local governments are in budget crises for the past 40 to 50 years is because they are all magically wasting money and being not frugal, right? There's a revenue generation problem, not a spending problem. And the revenue generation problem, I think, is directly linked to our cutting taxes on so many folks. We've covered, of course, on the show that the top marginal tax rate, that is the tax rate that goes for the highest income earners, whichever that bracket happens to be. It changes over time, but the top marginal tax rate used to be 90% in the United States. It went down to 70% for a long time, and now it's down to like 30. Oh boy, I don't remember the nearest figure. It's like around 35%. It might be exactly 35. Of course, we know the corporate tax rate was cut down to like 20 to 25%. Mm-hmm. I should know these off the top of my head. But our taxes have dramatically fallen over the years because that's been economically popular thanks to conservative economic theorists like Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, and so on and so forth, the Chicago School of Economics. And that's kind of pushed and peddled to say that we should starve the beast, drown government in a bathtub, have austerity principles, government should have a less role in our lives, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where we're at. We've covered that a lot on the show. And so let's get back to our point here, where these over 100 New York State legislators are calling for tax increases on the wealthy. They're saying, look, we have a revenue problem in New York State. We have a $14 billion budget deficit. COVID-19 has worsened already pretty poor social structures in our lives. We have these social structures that are kind of broken, have been exposed more. Black, brown, and poor folks are hurt the most by these social structures, and also during COVID-19. And we need to raise taxes on billionaires in particular, if not millionaires, to cover some of these issues. I should note that among the 100 New York State legislators who are behind this, Harry Bronson is one of them. He's a local person that I just wanted to mention out of the list of folks in support. And so, let me just read a little bit of their statement. Again, this is a letter that came out last month from these 103 New York State legislators. They say, quote, even before COVID-19, New Yorkers urgently needed major increased public investments in healthcare, public education from pre-K through higher education, housing, mass transportation, and many other fundamental services. That means new revenue raised by taxes on high wealth. Washington has the responsibility and fiscal resources to aid the states to respond to the unprecedented huge costs and losses brought on by the pandemic. Whatever we do in New York must not be seen as implying that the federal government is in any way relieved of its responsibility, but we must be prepared to deal with the federal failures to respond. Again, this is from the New York's Road to Recovery, a people-centered solution that was released last month by the 103 New York State legislators. I think a few more folks have joined that since then. But Mary, I want to cover this sort of debate between state responsibilities and federal responsibilities in a little bit. So let's get back to that in a little bit. But let's kind of lay out some of the facts and figures here. So New York State has 119 billionaires. There are around, I think, like 650 billionaires in the United States. So New York has a lot of them, proportionally. I could be wrong on that, but New York State has 119 billionaires. And overall, the wealth of the most wealthy in our society has increased over the past 3 to 4 months during COVID-19.
Yep.
That is counterintuitive because most Americans' wealth has decreased during the pandemic.
Drastically, even.
Right, because people have lost employment, people's incomes have been cut, people's hours have been reduced. So people's wealth has decreased for most Americans throughout the pandemic. However, the wealth of the wealthiest in our society, the wealthiest capitalists, has increased. Jeff Bezos, for instance, he's been in the news a lot. He's the CEO of Amazon. He's the wealthiest person in the world. His wealth has increased around $25 billion during the past 3 to 4 months alone. $25 billion.
Oh, wait, that's more than the debt of New York State.
Yes, indeed. It's $10 billion more than the entire debt of the state of New York by this one man. That's interesting.
Just thought I'd
just throw that in there.
Throw that in there, yeah.
Yeah, as a quick aside, it's so hard to talk about inequality. It's like the least sexy thing one can do because you just talk about numbers. Mary, I shared with you a video earlier this week, actually, and this was shared to me by someone else. It's been really helpful to visualize the difference between numbers. So there's, right, let's go back to math class, and I'm very bad at math. There's like ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions, right?
You just keep adding zeros, yeah.
And you keep adding zeros. And so I think $1 billion is 1,000 more than $1 million. Maybe. I'm literally not sure. But the point is, there's videos out there that show in like different visual illustrations the differences between the numbers. So
yeah, I've seen things where people collect paper clips and stuff, and you see like one paper clip and then like a mountain.
Yes.
Like a huge mountain that the person could hide in.
Yes.
Very uncomfortably, but still.
Certainly. So each time you go from a different word, from like 1,000 to million to billion, it increases by a lot. It's not, you know, it's a lot. So when we say $1 billion, that's a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know? And there's different illustrations out there. So, you know, to say that Jeff Bezos has made $25 billion more during COVID-19, that's a heck of a lot of money, especially when the state budget shortfall, as we mentioned, is only, quote, only $14 billion. Again, heck of a lot of money.
Which is also a lot of money, yes.
Yeah. But, you know, it's not just about Jeff Bezos. He's obviously in the news a lot because he's a very useful symbol. He's a very useful kind of figurehead because everyone knows what Amazon is. And if he's the wealthiest guy out there, he's the easiest one to talk about, right? But again, there's 119 billionaires in New York State. There's a lot more millionaires. There's a lot of money out there that's trapped in various, you know, that's kind of trapped in a very small amount of hands. And so, for instance, let's cover some different angles on this. There's a report by the Americans for Tax Fairness. That's a sort of an organization that covers a lot of tax policy. So there's a report by the Americans for Tax Fairness that estimates that the wealth of New York's 119 billionaires increased by around $77 billion just throughout COVID. So the wealth of all of our billionaires in New York State increased by 15% throughout COVID. That's $77 billion. Again, Mary, that is, 4 to 5 times the amount of the state's entire budget deficit, just in the hands of these 119 people.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Forbes estimates that all of New York's 119 billionaires are worth $600 billion. Again, that's, now we're talking a lot more than the state's entire budget shortfall.
Yeah. So just between, let's see, that's an average of about 60 billion per person.
Right.
Which it's probably not spread out that way, but just to...
Yeah. Yeah, we've covered on the show before. Remember Mayor Michael Bloomberg ran for president, and he spent...
I do remember, unfortunately.
Yes. He spent more money in 3 months on his campaign. You know, he spent $1 billion on his campaign. He spent that amount in 3 months, and that money, let's say, could have gone to a million different things, you know. And so when we're talking about these numbers and these contexts, it can get confusing, and it can feel very Robin Hood-like. But the point is, there's an incredible... a dragon's hoard amount of money in the hands of a few people. And we've seen this throughout American history before, not counting for inflation and whatnot. Think the robber barons, the early industrial capitalists in the late 1800s, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, so on and so forth. Yeah. And we had a whole progressive revolution that tried to challenge their wealth and political power. Unfortunately, we're not there yet right now. But, the point is now is that there's a lot of wealth in very few hands, and that the wealth from just these 119 billion people could instantly solve our state's budget shortfall. Instantly if they wanted to, you know.
Instantly and then some.
Right. And the thing is, so even if these billionaires covered, let's just say, this year's state budget shortfall. I'm not saying that's good policy. I'm just saying, for example, let's say we cared about balancing the budget. We've also talked on the show before why balancing budgets is not even the most useful thing sometimes to think about. But let's say you balance the state's budget. These people are still going to be very well off. They're still going to be millionaires. They're still going to be billionaires. They can still buy whatever car, house they want.
Company.
They can go on whatever vacation they want. So stuff like that. As a quick reminder, though, just to reorient ourselves, you're tuned into 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, and you're listening to Evidence of Design. We're talking about legislative proposals by over 100 of our New York State legislators. This includes Harry Bronson locally, to enact a billionaires tax on unrealized capital gains for New York's 119 billionaires. This would help to fund social services and particularly provide and expand unemployment insurance for the many New Yorkers who are suffering the most from COVID-19. COVID-19, as we've mentioned, has revealed so many more. It has highlighted the cracks that have already existed within our society, and having decades of revenue shortfalls and a lack of spending on our social services has contributed to allowing us to be unprepared to tackle COVID-19's effects, such as, just to put one example, a disinvestment in public health. So this is a legislative proposal by a number of our legislators to do that. We saw, actually, Mary, that a lot of folks on the ground are taking up this call. Yesterday in New York City, I believe, there was a march to go. There was a march down New York, and they ended up at Governor Cuomo's mansion, Governor Cuomo's house in New York. So they were kind of marching down New York City to call Governor Cuomo to institute this billionaires tax. We'll talk about what Governor Cuomo's opinion on this tax is in just a little bit. And then earlier this week, there was a 24-hour kind of sleep in and fast in front of Jeff Bezos' Fifth Avenue $80 million penthouse, to kind of symbolize and protest the exorbitant amount of wealth held in small amount of hands in the United States. So there's folks, there's legislators taking this up, there's organizers on the ground, and this is to say nothing of a lot of the work going on for the Black Lives Matter movement as well.
Yeah, lots of organization going on, partially because so many people are out of work, which gives them a little bit more time to focus on things like that.
Yeah, I think there's a wake-up call, too. It's hard to be optimistic about this stuff. I don't want to be a fortune teller, but I'd like to think that there's a wake-up call in terms of folks realizing a lot of the things that changes should be happening. We've covered how we think that Bernie Sanders has contributed to a political revolution and really enacted a lot of, really created a lot of ideas that perhaps might have not been politically on the table, that would actually fundamentally solve our systemic issues. I should note that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the House of Representatives member on the federal level from Queens, is behind this call for Governor Cuomo to enact a billionaires tax as well. So, Mary, let's talk about actually Governor Cuomo's angle on this. Let's talk about whether he supports raising taxes on billionaires and millionaires, and in short, he does not.
Based on when we discussed the State of the State address, I'm not entirely surprised. One of the main points that he had was lowering taxes.
Yeah.
Specifically in the address was on the working class, to be fair, but there was no indication that he was in favor of raising taxes for anybody.
Yeah, and when we covered the budget several weeks ago now, several episodes ago now as well. The state budget? The state budget, yeah, the New York State budget. One of the big kind of things to celebrate that Cuomo was arguing for in the budget was tax decreases. Again, they're incredibly nominal, I think, but it was so odd for Cuomo to be laying out this dire need in New York. We have a terrible budget shortfall. The federal government has failed us terribly, but also we're cutting taxes. And it's like, wait a second, I'm confused at how it can go both ways,
Well, I think that's the thing, Jason. It can't go both ways.
Right. It certainly can't, because again, government 101, if government is in shortfall, you need to raise revenue. Republicans would argue you cut spending, but when spending is already so hamstrung as it is, and our social services are already failing us, where is there else to cut? Unless we want to live in a libertarian ideal, will we all just look out for our own self-interests? I don't want to live in that society, but it's sort of rather confusing. So, to give Governor Cuomo credit, he's not wholly opposed to the theory of raising taxes on the wealthiest earners. In fact, he's sort of supported that theory before, but Cuomo likes to talk in terms of what he would define as practical measures. He doesn't want to just engage in rhetoric according to what he says. He says he wants to engage in things that can actually pass and be real and impact people's lives. So Cuomo says that, look, if you tax high-income earners in New York State, you'll only drive them out of the state. You'll incentivize them to move elsewhere, and it will hurt our tax base overall. Cuomo argues that the federal government should be the one stepping up to provide aid and relief. It shouldn't be the state's responsibility to do so. And Cuomo also says that, New York has a history of trying to lower its taxes because we're already apparently one of the highest tax states in the nation, and that we want to become more attractive and competitive for some of our wealthy folks to live here. So he's doing two things. He's saying, look, if you enact a wealth tax on millionaires and billionaires, you're only going to incentivize them to leave the state entirely. And he's also saying, look, this shouldn't be a state thing. This should be a federal thing. Let's take up his second point. I do think the federal government should have a role in increasing taxes. However, we certainly know that they haven't done that for the past 50 years. And so it's sort of wishful thinking and easy rhetorically to say, it's not my problem, it should be their problem, it should be their responsibility. Well, obviously, Donald Trump is not someone who's accountable for doing what needs to be done. And so,
well, especially since a certain Donald Trump has never released his own tax records.
Yes, certainly.
So it's up in the air as to whether he even pays taxes at all. So.
Yes, certainly the individual who is very likely guilty of malfeasance in the tax law and has avoided paying taxes his whole life. It doesn't seem like the type of guy who'd probably institute the progressive and liberal changes we need.
Most likely not.
To look out for black, brown, poor communities and also Americans at large. And also, there's a guy named Mitch McConnell in the New York in the Senate who isn't great at doing the democratic things either. So, and I don't mean Democratic Party. I mean democratic as a form of government. So. I think it's easier said than done than it's a federal responsibility. I get Cuomo's point, but I also would sort of have a counter argument and say, well, you got to do what you got to do. You got to do the right thing.
I would also say that starting this kind of policy in a state, if it hasn't been done in the federal government in decades, starting a policy such as a high wealth tax within a state gives a sort of example for the rest of the country. It's a way to practice whether this would work on a federal level, especially since New York has such a huge budget and such a diverse population. It would be a great trial run in some ways to show whether this would work on a larger level in other states. So I would counter his argument. I do agree as well that this is necessary on a federal level, but starting it in one state both gives a good example and gives a trial so that we could try it elsewhere.
Yeah, and Governor Cuomo's actually used that argument before, Mary. He's often heard saying that New York State is the kind of progressive laboratory in the country and that we do things in New York to set examples for other states to follow. So he's made that argument himself many, many times to say that, look, we are setting the example for the country. Mm-hmm. So we can also set the example for the country by finally doing what makes sense, which we've historically done for the history of income taxes in the United States, which is to tax the wealthiest individuals in our society proportionally. And so there's a history and a precedence to that, and we could certainly set the example to do that. So I would agree with your kind of counter-argument to that point.
It sounds like he's just trying to find a way out of doing it.
Yeah. And, rightfully so. It's politically unpopular. Let me back up. There are lots of polls out there that say a vast majority of Americans support increasing taxes on the wealthiest individuals in society. That's been going on for a long time. So, one, it is not necessarily politically unpopular, but it's politically difficult to do. But looks like we do have a caller here, so let's turn our attention to the phone on 100.9 FM WXIR. You're listening to Evidence of Design, and hello, you should be on the air.
Hello, this is Aaron from Queens calling in. First of all, can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, thanks for calling, Aaron. It's been a while. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just wanted to let you guys know your tunein.com stream does not appear to be working, so since I live in Queens, Aaron from Queens, I could not hear what's been going on in the show so far, so I'm calling in completely blind, but you know what? I'm sure you guys are dying to hear from me anyways, no matter what the topic is.
Well, actually, it's kind of an appropriate time to be calling in. We're just talking about Governor Cuomo, and we've been talking about things going on in New York City.
Yeah,
okay.
Aaron, we're talking about how recently 103 New York State legislators have gotten behind proposals to enact a billionaires tax in New York State. This has been led actually by your Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And,
nice lady.
Yes, and they have been arguing that we need to increase taxes on billionaires and millionaires in the state so that we can close our state budget shortfall, but also more importantly, to fund the social services like schools, infrastructure, unemployment insurance, and hospitals. And so we're talking about kind of why they're supporting a tax increase, and we're talking about where Governor Cuomo and the Republicans stand on that. Did you want to call in and comment on that or something else?
Well, I like how you lump Governor Cuomo and the Republicans in together because I think in a lot of cases that's pretty appropriate. Cuomo certainly likes his political posturing and being a hero for liberals across the country, as the adult in the room on the coronavirus, for example. But, I'm pretty much disappointed in his policy positions year after year as he's been governor. And I assume, based on the way you phrased it, he's against this billionaires tax.
Yeah, we were just talking about kind of two arguments Cuomo uses to sort of be against the tax increase. To be fair to Cuomo, he has sort of been behind at times the idea of increasing taxes on the wealthy. He does at times support the idea that the wealthy should pay more in taxes, but at least in regards to specifically these proposals to increase to enact a billionaires tax, he basically makes two arguments. The first argument is that increasing taxes on the wealthy would drive wealthy individuals out of the state, and we would lose their tax revenue overall. And his second argument is that this shouldn't be the state's responsibility to help increase tax revenue during this tough time. It should be the federal government stepping up to help states.
Right. I just want to address those individually. First of all, you hear this all the time. Anytime there's an idea of raising taxes on the wealthy, it's like, oh, well, the wealthy will just move out of the state or city or country or whatever you're talking about. It doesn't matter what level of locality this issue is here. But the point is, like, that may be true for some of them, but this is New York City. It's considered the greatest city in the world by many. We certainly have the best food overall. Whether or not a few wealthy people will, change their residence to be outside of New York City, we can't be afraid of that, because if that argument holds true, then you should never raise taxes on wealthy people anywhere, because then they'll just go elsewhere. And you know what? They have the means to. If you raise taxes on rich people in every country in the world except one, then people will say, oh, but then they're going to that one country, and they probably could, because they certainly have the means to. And they're already dodging taxes to the maximum extent already, using, very high-priced tax lawyers and offshore bank accounts and all this stuff that's been really revealed in things like the Panama Papers and stuff like that for so long now. So we just can't be afraid of that, New York is New York. We have the advantage of being a special and very unique city. And if a few people are going to find a way to dodge the taxes, then so be it. I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, the city is better off without them. And then to the other point, What was the second point?
And also, Aaron, just to say, like, it's not just about New York City in terms of this tax revenue; it also encompasses the whole state. But I get your point, actually,
right.
That it doesn't matter if billionaires leave because they're evading taxes anyways. And so
very, very New York City centric. It's very stereotypical of somebody from New York to only care about what happens.
Yeah, you New York Cityers think that the state is all the city, No,
Rochester is lovely. You guys have a great Lilac Festival,
which didn't happen this year, by the way, but that's okay. The lilacs were still there.
So Cuomo's second argument why he wouldn't be in support of increasing taxes on the wealthy is that right now it shouldn't be the responsibility of state governments to do that. It should be the responsibility of the federal government to set the precedents.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what fantasy land Cuomo is living in where he thinks Donald Trump is going to go out of his way to help New York State in a tough time, or other states that are struggling. First of all, Trump doesn't even care about the straight up fact that people are dying from this disease across the country. Upwards of 200,000 Americans are going to die from this now because, as we all know, coronavirus rates are skyrocketing across the country. And as far as I know, Trump is just wants it all to be over so he can go back to golfing every day. So he doesn't even care about people's lives, let alone states' budgets. And he's actively shown many times over in his policies and his statements that he wants to hurt blue states. The whole tax bill was designed to hurt blue states by making it so that you couldn't deduct your paid state income taxes from your federal income taxes, and blue states, because we are better places to live and actually have decent or relatively decent social services, at least for for America, as far as America is concerned. That is specifically directed at people who live in blue states with higher taxes. And I mean, just look at what he's doing right now in Portland, unleashing his federal secret police to basically harass the entire city of Portland because, I guess he figures it's a good target because it's known for being a very liberal city in a relatively liberal state. So I don't know if I don't know why Cuomo thinks that Trump, of all people, is going to ride to the rescue of New York. He would let New York die. He would let New York just, other than Trump Tower, other than the one square block protected by, a massive police presence. He doesn't give a crap about us. So it's fantasy land if he thinks it would be nice. I agree, the federal government, because they have the power of fiat money, because they can just create money and, print it in the Federal Reserve. They should be using their powers to help out state governments. Because, states are much more restrictive in what they can do like that. They actually have to raise money the old-fashioned way through bonds and taxes and stuff like that. But, this is the world we're living in. It sucks. And I do wish, we had a president who actually cared about people's lives and, the states in his country, but we don't. So, yeah, the amount of wealth disparity in New York State is staggering. I believe you guys have talked about Jamal Bowman on the show.
We haven't.
The other progressive leader. Oh, okay. Well, you should. He's great. But I recently saw he shared a graphic of inequalities nationally, and I expected the red states to be much more unequal than the blue states because, that's just how we expect things to be with the tax situation and all that. But actually, the most unequal states in the country, according to that graph, were New York and Florida.
Yeah.
And it's because that's where the wealthy people are. Because when you have, a handful of mega billionaires who are in these places, it obviously skews the inequality. And, it absolutely isn't right that there's this part of Queens that I live in, being one of the most hard-hit places by coronavirus in the country, we're shouldering the burden of that. So many people, including myself, have lost their jobs because of this, and meanwhile we have some of the highest concentration of billionaires in the entire world.
Yeah, you've brought up a number of points. You brought up the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the SALT tax reduction, just to be specific on that. And also, blue states do tend to have higher economic inequality than red states, only because blue states tend to have the large cities, and the mega billionaires and millionaires tend to live in large cities, and that's their financial centers and capitals. So it just, the way the political map shakes out, it just tends to be that blue states, being more urban, tend to have more wealthy folk, more of the wealthiest folks, and that's why they tend to have more economic inequality. And yeah, we were talking earlier in the hour how there's 119 billionaires in New York State. Only California has more billionaires than that. And the wealth of these billionaires during COVID has increased by 15%. So it's increased by $77 billion. So the total net worth of all of our billionaires in New York State is $600 billion. Again, the New York State budget shortfall alone is only $14 billion, only with quotes. So the wealth that's amassed just in the hands of these 119 people, to say nothing of the immeasurable political power, is really astounding. We're not even talking about our millionaire population in New York, which is, of course, much larger. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, it always comes down. It's the same issue that you guys talk about every week, and it all comes down to the same thing. There is a massive inequality in the country and the world. There is a tiny, tiny fraction of the human population that is hoarding almost all of the wealth, and that needs to end.
Yeah, Aaron, it's good to hear your voice. Stay safe in Queens, and thanks for your call as always.
Yep. Thanks very much.
Take care. Again, for those who want to share your thoughts on 100.9 FM WXIR on our show Evidence of Design, you're welcome to give us a call at 585-219-8889, 585-219-8889. We have less than 10 minutes now to wrap up our show, Mary. I don't think we're going to get to talking about voter restrictions. That is worth a full show anyways. We've covered that a lot too, but unfortunately the issues go on. There's a couple last points I want to raise in regards to recent proposals to enact a billionaire tax in New York State. And that's the response from Republicans. We've already talked a little bit about Cuomo. The response from Republicans is that they're of course opposed to raising taxes on the wealthy. This is a statement from the New York State Republican Party. They're opposed to raising taxes on the wealthy, and they urge instead to cut wasteful spending. Quote, wasteful spending.
What would they consider to be wasteful spending, out of curiosity?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I don't. It would be callous of me to say I'm not sure they're sure, but
I mean, you can say it.
Yeah,
if that's what you think.
It's certainly, I don't think, as I've said already throughout the hour, I don't think there's much merit to that argument to cut wasteful spending. Of course, it is possible for governments to be wasteful in their spending, but again, if we have been in budget deficits for 50 years in so many different states and whatnot, and localities in the federal government, I don't see wasteful spending as the problem with that. I see revenue as a problem with that, and we can draw a very simple through line to connect the fact that we have drastically cut taxes on the wealthiest individuals over time, and so too has our revenue fallen because of it. To be fair to this argument, Cuomo's budget director, Robert Mujica, it's Mujicia, I should know how to pronounce that. The budget director of the state says that the top 2% of wealthiest individuals already pay half of the state's taxes. So he says, look, these wealthiest individuals are already being taxed at such a burden, such that they're paying half of our state taxes. Mary, would you say anything in response to that? What would your counter argument to be to that?
I mean, sorry, that caught me a little bit off guard. I would just say if they are already paying half of the state's taxes at only a 35% tax, then they probably have too much money.
Yeah, well, I actually don't know what the state's top marginal tax rate is. The 35% was the federal one.
Oh, the federal.
Yeah, but I would kind of agree with your larger point that, I mean, there's still billionaires and there's still millionaires with more money than they'll ever spend in their lives at what they're already being taxed with. So one could still increase.
That's already a huge indicator of the inequality that exists already, and what their money could be better served doing, or the fact that we don't have any regulations or a maximum amount that people can earn
Yeah, and how about this for statistics? So here's the budget director saying the top 2% of wealthiest households already pay half of New York State's taxes. Well, we know that the top 10% of wealthiest households, this is according to the Federal Reserve, the top 10% of wealthiest households in the United States control more than 70% of all of the wealth. So, I mean, one can counter the argument by saying, well, the wealthiest individuals already control more than 50% anyways of the wealth and income. So...
Yeah, so if they have 70% of the wealth, then in theory they should also pay 70% of the taxes.
Or something
like that.
Right, or something of that nature. So, it can be very tricky to get your heartstrings pulled and think about in terms of like equity versus equality. But, thank you for showing me the time, Mary. I could ramble on forever about this, but we can't. We have to close out our show, so thanks for tuning in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. This was Evidence of Design, episode 103. We'll have to close our show today. You can always find our past episodes on YouTube by searching for our Evidence of Design YouTube channel. To be specific with your search for Evidence of Design, episode 1 through 102, and it will pop up for you. You can also stay in touch with us throughout the week at emailing us at radioeod@gmail.com or contacting us on Facebook and Twitter at Radio EOD. Intro and outro music, as always, is provided by Modest Mouse with the song Dramamine off of their album A Long Drive with Nothing to Think About. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined in studio by my co-host, Mary Lawrence.
We will pick up the ramble next week.
Indeed. She was also on the engineering role and co-producer, and our other co-producer and host, Matt Treadwell, is still not with us for right now because of a close death in his family. So our hearts go out to him, and he will hopefully be back with us soon. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to your local grassroots community radio station, 100.9 FM, WXIR. Stay tuned for the Esquire Hour. Be well, be safe, take care, and bye-bye.